Does America seem to be sleeping while the curtain closes? I'm Father Tom Roberts. Thank you so much for listening to this broadcast. We have some definite issues as a culture we need to address. We are seeing the decimation of North American and Indo-European culture under the guise of racism. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case. We all know that we committed, as Indo-Europeans and Western Europeans, genocide against the North American Indian in much the same way that the British did through the Australians towards the Aborigines. Don't think for a moment that your speaker feels that practice in any way was ever justifiable. The problem in our culture today is these practices have been exploited by special interest groups who seek to divide the culture of the West and to offer another mantra as the solution. And we may not like the solution that they are offering if we were more aware of it. But unfortunately, most people are sleeping. Most people care more about getting up, doing their day-to-day affairs, trying to put bread on the table, get the kids off to school, and to keep the bills paid if they can, bless their hearts, and to live what we think of as the American dream. And in Australia, it's the Australian dream, and in Canada, it's the Canadian dream. But really, it's the desire of most people. We are just too isolated to really know that. But unfortunately, our quest for happiness leaves much to be desired as far as meeting the growing social and economic threat that many have planned for Western civilization. We have all feared that it would come to a screeching halt someday. But now, is it possible that we are living in that time of history? You say, Father Roberts, you are negative. We could have a positive outcome. Number one, we have to stop the perverts from running our media, and we have to stop the wealthy, the 1% I'm speaking of, not the upper middle income people of your particular city and town. I'm speaking of the 1% whose incomes have not been reinvested in the country to make our society more noble and better. That used to be the noble traditions of European and American professionalism. But today, it's about investors. It's not about inventors. There's an awful lot of sick music out there rather than the poeticness of a Rogers and Hammerstein. Today, we argue about how low should America's wages be to compete with third world enterprises as opposed to how great is American and Canadian, Australian, and European ingenuity. The only reason I list these geographical areas is not for racial purposes, but is for a common ancestry that we have politically, as well as educationally, economically, and in other historical developments from the colonial period. Now, is America not the place of opportunity? Well, we have been. But even that has been socially exploited. For example, if you say, folks, we need to take care of our own people first before we open the floodgates, right then and there, you are considered a racist. When it's not a racial statement. I think everyone should come to America providing we have a job for them that is not being filled by taxpayers who raised up the current generation to be their benefactors, right? So you take care of your own first. Then you open your hearts and your arms to those who will come here as are tired and poor used to suggest. But the question is, you cannot bring in just anyone. It's not good for them, and it's not good for the maintenance of the society. The state of California, back in the 1980s, spent $40 million just on translating documents for their state civil service into 40 languages. Why not assimilate the people into the American way of life? Well, it's because we feel America is a plumb line of other cultures that began with the British, which gave us our language and much of our political and economic, and of course our common English law in the legal system. Yes, there is a culture, but every culture in the world is a combination of other cultures. It's the American isolationism that doesn't really promote such a notion. And it's our lack of knowledge of anthropology and where other nations have come from. We are all combinations of each other. That isn't just an American phenomenon. And yet we all need a common cultural value system. We can be very different in our personal economics and codes at home, but in general society, we need a societal norm that is understood, honored, and practiced for the common good. Today, the common good is not even hardly discussed. People say today, well, there is no normality in our society. There is no normality to the American family. If you went back 60 years, we used to consider that particular line of thought unstable or even insane. Insanity grips the land, and it is not leading us to the promised land. It is not healing our people. It is not bringing us any freedom, not even financially, let alone personally or spiritually. There was a time when our common values were reflected even on television programs where people would say, remember, God is watching. Today, God has been replaced with a higher power. We don't know who or whom, which is a word we leave out of our lexicon quite often. We often say that, for that one or that thing or that entity, rather than whom. I will ask the question, whom this day will you serve? It seems that even passion for life and passion for the good things that we have stood for, as we used to understand it, is at an all-time low. It's hard to get people passionate about the right things, about things that have eternal and moral and personal consequences to them. We'll fight over politics, but will not ask that the present regime are actually removed from office, because we can no longer decide upon what the Constitution actually says and whether or not it actually applies to modern life. Wow. Once again, the church is in no better condition. When the social gospel ruined the liberal church in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, even though it had a great deal of truth to it, it taught relativism to such a degree that the reason for the church was null and void. So we talked ourselves right out of a job, a need to exist. Can you imagine joining the Elks Club or the Kiwanis Club and yet not knowing why you exist, saying even the reason that you were called into existence is no longer valid? Well, how many people are going to become members of such an operation? And now the conservative church is doing the same thing under postmodernism with its oversimplistic and narrow-minded views of life. The gospel has the answers. The gospel is not for the tyranny. No matter what you hear out of modern preaching, that is soon going to befall America if these trends do not exist permanently. But yet it looks as if they will, unless we take action to have common communities, to learn to love and to grow and to understand each other, and unless we learn to value human relationships and truly share with each other about life and our hopes and our dreams and help each other when we are in trouble, personally or financially or spiritually, through providing good ministries rather than just politically charged ones. That killed the liberal church, and it is ailing the conservative church as we speak, because people in this postmodern era do not want to be told what to believe. And it creates polarity and division when the church does not take up the moral authority that is centered around human behavior. This is Father Tom Roberts saying, pick up your cause and pick up your passion and unite with people, or we will fall separately. Thanks for listening.